Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike, but that's not why I'm here today. This is another Saving Savvy episode, actually a Photography 101 episode, and today we're talking all about shutter speed and why it's important for you to know about it. So shutter speed, the first thing to know is that it's part of the exposure triangle. So remember, three things control proper exposure so you get a properly exposed image, and that's shutter speed, or how quickly the shutter opens and closes, the aperture, or how wide the lens is, and the ISO, or how sensitive the sensor is. Actually, how much gain is placed in the sensor, but same sort of a thing. Now, on some cameras, like my trusty old D300S, shutter speed is indicated. You have to actually move some dials, and you get a little S in the LCD display. But in a lot of cameras, it's just going to be an S on the command mode, and I think on Canons it's like a TV or something for time value. It's all kind of the same thing. So why do we want to know about shutter speed? Well, a couple of reasons. So let me get into a different screen, and I can do that. So here you see some kind of flag wavers in a parade. And this was all done in automatic setting, and this was a shutter speed of 1/800th of a second done automatically just on the auto mode. And you can see that they're not only stationary, but their flags are stationary. In this picture, this was from a school play. This is, I don't know who this is, but it's The Cowardly Lion. And because the person was fairly stationary, and because the theater was, or the gym was fairly dark, this was a shutter speed of 1/80th of a second, because I wanted to get as much light as I could to the sensor so I could take this picture. And since the person wasn't moving very much, that was possible. Here we have an example of using a very long shutter speed. This is 0.8 of a second, and this was done on a tripod to give you kind of a night view without any flash or anything like that. So when is shutter speed important? So let's take a look at a bunch of different scenarios, and what I'm going to do is show you how to kind of figure out the right shutter speed that you should use to obtain the type of image that you're looking for. So let's go back into our images. Okay, so here we have one of my wonderfully cooperative children, and what she's doing, which you don't realize, is she's actually slowly fanning herself with this fan. And what we're doing is we're shooting her at 1/500th of a second using the shutter speed control, and you can see the fan is perfectly stationary. Now we move to 1/250th of a second. Still, because she's not moving that fan very fast, the fan is stationary. Now we go to 1/125th of a second, so the shutter is staying open longer, not very long, and you're starting to see just a little bit of blur in the fan, although it's still kind of clear. Let's move to 1/30th of a second. So now the shutter's open for a very long time, and the shutter is a complete blur. And if we go down to 1/8th of a second, well, you can actually see past the fan, and you can see her shirt below because the shutter is open for such a long period of time. So shutter speed here is freezing motion, and it's also, if you wanted a blur effect for some other reason, you could get that. Now let's move into a scenario where something is moving a little bit faster. And in this case, we're going to have my son jumping up in the air. So if he looks a little odd, I mean, let's give him kudos for allowing me to have him do this. It's because he's actually airborne. So let's go to the first picture. All right, this is 1/2500th of a second. And you can see that he's perfectly clear. He's up in the air, no problems. But he's moving faster than that fan. Now we're at 1/1000th of a second, still pretty clear, no problem. If we go to 1/250th of a second, and remember the fan was perfectly clear, he's pretty clear, but he's just slightly blurry. So 1/250th of a second would be just a little too slow for this sort of scenario. 1/80th of a second, again the shutter is open longer, definitely blurry. We go to 1/50th of a second, he's really blurry. And we go to 1/5 of a second, and he is so blurry we can, again, almost see through him at parts, and he's just kind of a big smear. So to determine the right shutter speed, you have to do a little experimenting. Typically, if the object isn't moving very fast, you might get away with 1/60th of a second, or 1/80th of a second, or 1/100th of a second, sort of like in that play scene. If the object is moving a little faster, you might have to go up to 1/250th of a second. If you're having an object that's moving very fast, you might have to go even a little faster than that, like maybe 1/500th of a second or a little bit less, depending on your needs. Now, is there any time that you want to have a slow shutter speed? Well, I already showed you one example, and that was the restaurant's scene where we really wanted to use a tripod and get a nighttime scene, and we wanted to expose for a very long time so we didn't have to use a flash. But there are some creative things that you can do with a slow shutter too. And so let me show you those. And I want to tell you this, that some of these, to get the shutter speed as slow as I wanted, I had to use something called a neutral density filter, which is basically like putting like sunglasses on your lens. So it really reduces the light to the lens so you actually can get longer exposure time. So let's take a look at some of those examples. All right. Here, I couldn't find a waterfall by our house, so this is actually just a fake pond by an apartment complex, and they have one of those aeration sort of fountains. It was the best I could do. So here I'm shooting that fountain at 1/2000th of a second. Looks perfectly fine. You can see all of the water droplets shooting up from the fountain. You can see a lot of disturbance around the fountain in the water. And of course, you can see little waves coming from the fountain out towards the grass. Now, if I move that shutter speed and I make it slower to 1/250th of a second, not much difference, although it does seem like some of those water droplets are coalescing together. They're kind of merging together. Still not the effect that I'm looking for. So to get a longer shutter speed, I can do a couple of things. I can select a longer shutter speed, or sometimes I can just move my aperture down to a much smaller value. In this particular camera that I was using, I was able to go down to to an f of 22. I can also manually make sure that my ISO is as low as I can go. And in this particular camera, the lowest kind of native setting is an ISO of 200. And so if we start doing things like that, we can get a low shutter speed of about 1/10 of a second. Again, this is on a tripod. If I was holding this, this would be completely blurry. And now we have an interesting effect. The water looks much more attractive. It's much smoother and I think more beautiful. If you look at the base around the little sprayer, it's still pretty disturbed. There's still some waves. So let's start using that neutral density filter so we can even use much slower shutter speeds. Here we are at 6 seconds. Again, I'm using a tripod, so I'm not holding this for 6 seconds. And I'm actually using the timer on the camera, so I'm not even touching the camera when the shutter goes off. And you can see that now the water coming up from the fountain is even smoother and creamier looking, and the water at the base of the fountain is starting to look very smooth and nice. The waves are kind of evened out. Look, and it's even a more pleasant picture. And so now if I go up all the way to 1/15th of a second, because I'm adjusting this neutral density filter, the one I have, I can actually make it lighter or darker. Here we see, and we're at an f22, ISO of 200. Here what we can see is that the waves are completely gone or almost completely gone, and the disturbances around the base of the fountain are almost completely flat, giving you an even more attractive sort of image. So let me get out of that, and we'll be back with you. And here we are again. And so that's another way that you can use shutter speed. Now, obviously, taking photos of aeration fountains in little fake ponds might be fun, but think about using it in different things. Maybe you wanted to shoot some rapids on a river or a waterfall or things like that, where having a slow shutter speed and you're on a tripod could really give you a cool kind of impact. So that's the information about shutter speed. The best advice I could give you is to experiment a little bit. And for most of you, that's going to be trying to find the shutter speed that's going to give you the impact that you want, often to stop action, whether it's slow action like someone walking or faster action like someone playing sports. But you can use longer shutter speeds to do really amazing and beautiful things, like capture night scenes that you normally wouldn't be able to capture without using a harsh flash, or kind of smoothing out things like I did with those water scenes. So that's my talk, and thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe so I make more of these videos. I make a variety of videos on different things just because I have interest in them. And also, please give my free audio podcast a listen. It's called Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. It's on iTunes and other podcatching sites. And today is the day before, in America, in the U.S., Father's Day. So I have my number one dad cup out today. I'm going to use it. And hopefully I'll get breakfast in bed tomorrow. We'll see what happens. Take care, everyone.